Oh, I need to turn that up. I turned that down earlier. There we go. Yeah, okay, all the way up. Cool. All righty. Welcome, welcome. Happy Sunday morning. Welcome to our adult Sunday school class. Going through the whole Bible story, we are at a point in time where we are after the age of the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Job. And we are now in the transition between that and getting ready for the Exodus. So we have just last week covered the birth of Moses and his upbringing. And so we are going to pick up there in the book of Exodus, chapter 2. Like to find your way there as I share my screen. So we are getting our Outside the Bible timeline from Egyptologist David Roll and his new chronology. And we are, of course, bringing that all in line with the Word of God itself. We have ended here in the year 1508 BC. This is Middle Bronze Age 2A. Over in China, we're under Emperor Taiwu of the Shang Dynasty. In Egypt, hey, Robinson's good to see you. In Egypt, we are being led by Pharaoh Sobekhotep IV. So let's see, Sobekhotep IV, boom, 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 down around hereabouts. There's a third. All these Sobekhoteps. Neferhotep, there we go. Sobekhotep. This is the Pharaoh who raises Moses. Sobekhotep IV. He is ruling in the south in the 13th dynasty. Up in the north, they've got a pharaoh as well. His name is Pantgeno. And he is mixed blood with the Hebrews, who are very populous in the northern delta there. And his daughter, Merit, daughter of that pharaoh, ends up marrying Sobekhotep IV, native Egyptian from the south, pure blood. And so that kind of seals the deal and keeps all of Egypt united, mostly under Sobekhotep IV in the south. And as we saw last week, it was the Pharaoh of the north, Pantgenu, his daughter Merit, who discovers baby Moses in the basin there and brings him up. And she, daughter of that Pharaoh, wife of the other, she brings him into her household. And Moses ends up being raised by the Pharaoh who ordered the baby boy death decree. So the Lord certainly does have a sense of irony. And over in Babylon, in the Middle East, they're being ruled now by the son of Hammurabi, Samsu-iluna, who is trying to hold together what his father had established. So about this time frame in the line of Christ, we have through Judah, we have Ram, who's about 95 years old now, Ram's son Aminadab, about 36 years old. And this brings us to where we left off in Exodus chapter 2. Let's pick up in verse 10. Why don't you go back to this guy here as we read. Exodus chapter 2, verse 10 tells us, and the child grew, she brought him to, that's Moses' mother, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses and said, because I drew him out of the water. And we'll tie this in with Acts chapter 7. And the words of Stephen giving the spiritual background to these events. In Acts chapter 7, let's pick up in verse 21. Acts 7:21. Stephen proclaims through the Spirit, Acts 7:21, here we are. And after he had been put outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and nurtured him as her own son. Verse 22, Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was proficient in speaking and action. So Moses was very capable growing up in the land of Egypt, in the royal household. Very, very capable young man, and we're about to see that. So there is an event that we have a record of outside the Bible about the life of Moses that we are going to take a little story time to explore. There is a very tiny reference to this in scripture. It comes up a bit later, and we'll talk about that, but I don't want to give any spoiler alerts because that's me. So we're in 1508 BC, under Sobekhotep IV, Pharaoh of all the land. He's got the minor pharaoh up in the north, his father-in-law. So things from around this time, two colossal statues of this guy have been found over at the city of Tanis that probably came from this area in Avaris where the Hebrews are. That would often be the summer retreat for the pharaohs in the south. So he's basically got the two palaces he's ruling from, hopping back and forth. So Moses would be in both. Moses was born around the 6th year of Sobekhotep IV's reign. He grew up in the main house in, I love the name, Ichitawi. Always makes me want to scratch. Let's see. Ichitawi, let's see. There we are. Ichitawi. So there's the Nile Delta, the what's referred to as Lower Egypt. And that's where the Lord's people are headquartered at. And they are dealing with Pharaoh up in the south here. Ichitawi is right here. And this is the main palace where Moses would grow up. See, it's about 25 miles north of this over here. Remember the waterway of Joseph and all the preparations for the flood and all that with regulating the water flow. That's all there. So this place, Ichitawi, has been the capital of Egypt from the days of Joseph in the 12th dynasty. It was actually before Joseph with Amenemhat I. It was Amenemhat III who was Joseph's main pharaoh. This stays the capital all the way until much later on after the Exodus when the Hyksos come in. We'll talk about who they are. And when the Hyksos came in, the native Egyptians would run away down further south to Thebes, further down there. But that's all coming up later. So Sobekhotep IV, again, his marriage to the daughter of the other pharaoh in the north, clever political marriage here, sealing this alliance, bringing the Delta Kingdom up here under the overall umbrella rule of Sobekhotep IV, the native pureblood Egyptian. So we also have records from this time showing that later on in the in the 19th dynasty, we're in the 13th now, so much later, that the city of Ramses had a southern quarter that was Avaris. Well, that's right there where the Lord's people are. That kind of shows us this is where they were much earlier than Ramses. That was all built later. So some other stuff here about a bunch of names. We'll skip all that. So a bunch of names of the areas. So here's the story time. So we've got Egypt here in the north. We've got, do this. So we got Egypt here in the north. Well, down here in the south, we've got another country that is known this time frame as Kush. It would later be known as Ethiopia. And as some records refer back to this time, they kind of keep the updated name of Ethiopia when it was back then known as Kush. So let's see here. We want you right there. And let's go back to the Ichitawi. There we go. So there's Egypt. Then south of Egypt, we have Ethiopia, Sudan, those areas. So there's a little bit of a local storm that is brewing here. So this happens with right over here. All the way down here towards the border, see where it says Semna Gorge and Cataract. Let's zoom into there. Right about here. Beyond these fortresses, further south, what they have is, you know how like some canals have locks, different sections? Well, the Nile has different cataracts, different sections and different barriers. So the Egyptians kind of guarding the border here, the second cataract. Further south of here, we have a powerful African kingdom known as Kush. Where did that name come from? It came from the guy in the Bible, son of Ham, grandson of Noah. Kush, before the Tower of Babel, he came sailing up around over to here and landed. His brother Mizraim came further north, and that's where Egypt came from, all sons of Ham. That was like 1,000 years ago. And lots changed, but this place is still known by the name Kush 1,000 years later. So These guys here in Kush, what's their culture and society like? It is brutal. It is militaristic. When these warrior kings died, they were buried in huge, what are called tumuli, basically big circular mounds of sand and rubble. Kushite capital over at Kerma. Let me go down here. Kerma, yeah, let's go to there. All right, let's do it this way. So we actually have a museum down there. Let's go down to Kerma. Here we are. So here is Kerma, and there's the delta up there in the north. So let's check this out. This gives us a taste of the society we are talking about down here. Yeah. So these folks, these rulers, these warrior kings, when they died, they did not go to their graves alone. You see this along here, see these big things and these little things along here? Yeah. Hundreds of servants were herded into long pits that bisected the funeral mounds. These unfortunate victims, as David Roll shares the story here, they were then buried alive beside the bodies of their royal masters. Now, sounds a bit barbaric, of course, to us. And some of this is from around the area, but we're getting a sense of it. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening here. Happy critter there. So these ceremonies of having people buried with you, that used to be the case back in the early dynasty days, Dynasty 0, Dynasty 1 and 2. And we have the records of that. We have the royal cemeteries there at Abydos, and we see all those graves, sacrificial victims. That's all been unearthed. And this actually carried over from Mesopotamia. They used to do that back over there. The records tell us that Gilgamesh, Nimrod's great-grandson, he went to the underworld, accompanied with his wives, his officials, his servants. At the city in Mesopotamia called Ur, archaeologist Leonard Woolley discovered in there that under the modern surface of the mound, they saw the tombs of Sumerian kings and queens, and they were not alone. They had ranks of soldiers. They had chariots pulled by oxen. They had musicians and servant girls. And it looks like all apparently willingly descended into the death pit to join their rulers in the afterlife. I put a note in there, except the oxen. I don't think anyone asked them. Yeah, you're thinking it. Great minds think alike, and so do ours. So this gruesome Mesopotamian practice made its way over to the African continent. But it's only here in this land of Kush that it's still continuing into past the 2000s BC. So remember that Sobekhotep's IV's brother, Neferhotep, reigned before him, and then Neferhotep's son very briefly in between. During Neferhotep's reign, while the Pharaoh in the north was strong with his trade along the Mediterranean with Promised Land over here and Turkey and Greece over there. So these guys down here were kind of stuck. So they started to open up trade in the south, and Sobekhotep IV did a lot of that. And that's how he became so powerful that he was able to bypass the Pharaoh in the north and deal directly with all these folks. The guy in Byblos even referred to him as his lord. And so that's how he was in a position to broker the union of them through the marriage. But what happened was, once he got big and powerful with all these folks up here, he forgot the folks down south. They didn't take too kindly to that. So what happened then? Well, as the story here goes, up there, let's try another one. So these folks in the south, they got the benefit of the trade while it lasted, but then they got forgotten and left behind in the dust. And as I said, didn't take too kindly to that. And so, back here down to Kerma. So what do they do? Well, the ruler of Kush decided that as their relationship sunk to an all-time low with Egypt, they decided if Egypt's no longer going to be trading with us, we'll just go up and take it. And that's exactly what they did. So this year, again, this is when Moses is about 18 years old. This year, riding the crest of the summer Nile floods, the ships of Kush sailed downstream, which means north, and across the border into Nubia, this area here. They easily overthrew the forts at Semna and Kuma. And then they ended up besieging right over here, the great military base at Buhen. What do I have up here to show us for Buhen? Yeah. So they laid siege to this fort for 3 months, and then it finally fell. Many inside were slaughtered. Parts of their defensive ramparts were put to the torch. Egyptians who survived were either enslaved or they swore loyalty to the Kushites and stayed at their posts. We actually have an inscription that shows that there's a switch of allegiance by the fortress commander here from Egypt over to Kush. So, as David Roll was telling the story, we also have records from Josephus, a Jewish historian during the time of Rome. He was actually given permission to remove the sacred scrolls from the temple, scrolls that did not get destroyed when the temple was destroyed by Rome in 70. So the scrolls that he had access to could be the source for some of the accounts that we get from Josephus. He says, Moses, when he came to the age of maturity, made his virtue manifest to the Egyptians. Now we're dealing with these Kushites in the south, they're referred to as Ethiopians. These Ethiopians, next door neighbors to the Egyptians, they made an incursion into the country, and they seized upon it, and they carried off the effects of the Egyptians. So this happened to a whole string of forts and fortresses all coming up the Nile here. We go up towards Aswan, which is right up here. So we see they're making their way. There's Aswan right there. Let's see that one. That's Buhen, yeah, then 50 Aswan. So as they're making their way up here, Sobekhotep IV, he sends a large force, from the post at Thebes. So they come here and meet the Kushites and have a battle. It goes disastrously for Egypt. The army of Pharaoh was poorly led and was no match for this warrior tribe of the Kushites. So the Egyptians had to retreat, and the gateway to Egypt was wide open for them. Within 6 more months, the city of Thebes falls. Thebes is right here. So Thebes falls. Beautiful temple at Karnak there, stripped of its treasures, priests are sent into slavery, and they keep marching north. All of Middle Egypt succumbed. Little resistance they could offer. So they finally make their way up to Ichitawi. So they've come all this way. There's Ichitawi right here. Sobekhotep IV and his royal entourage, they retreat back over here to Avaris for safety, where the Hebrews were, land of Goshen. This proved to be wise, because before the year was out, the Kushites ended up doing a brilliant flank move. They cut the pharaonic capital here off from the northern lifeline. So a large force of Kushite infantry struck on the western desert oasis here, and they ended up coming up along here, and they took Memphis completely by surprise. The whole of the Nile Valley is now under the hands of Kush. This is as far as the invasion reaches. Now think about this, kind of makes sense. This long, thin strip here, fertile land, the Nile Valley, it's always been really an easy target for conquest. An army could take settlement after settlement, like they did, one after the other in a row. You don't have to worry about how wide you are, because what's on both sides? Nothing but desert. You can see folks coming for miles. So you know you're good. You just keep plowing forward to the north. But that story changes once you get up here to the delta. Yes, here's Chitauri, here's Avaris here. So now you've got the battle terrain is now fragmented. You got slivers of land between all these little branches of the Nile that break out in this delta. Going from east to west or west to east is a nightmare. You got swamps, you got waterways every turn. And what's that? Let's not forget the crocodiles. Yes. Or as our family likes to say, crocodigators. We're not sure which one it is. We just say crocodigators. So an army could be easily ambushed. Its retreat could be cut off. So the chief of the Kushites, his commanders, they decide they've reached the limit of their conquest. So now they reinforce their position right here at the junction of the delta and the valley. Now they begin a united effort to plunder and ransack the cities and the temples of Upper Egypt all down this track here. So bad times. So during all this, Pharaoh Sobekhotep IV, his generals, they're up here skulking in Avaris, frightened to take on those Kushites there in Memphis. Seems like there's no one left who can command the confidence of the Egyptian forces that are demoralized. Yes, who's got a new line of sneakers out. So anyway, so according to Josephus, the Kushites proceed as far as Memphis and the sea itself. While none of the cities is able to oppose them, the Egyptians, under this sad oppression, took themselves to their oracles and prophecies when God had given them counsel to make use of Moses the Hebrew and take his assistance. The king commanded his daughter to produce him, that he might be the general of their army. So Pharaoh Janu in the north, his daughter Merit, brings forth her boy Moses, who's again now about 18 years old. So, story goes, with the state of Pharaoh in crisis, there's dire need of a savior to redeem Egypt from its oppressors. This is the first of two great callings in the life of Moses. Second calling's a bit far off, but the young prince of Egypt leaps to his first challenge with courage and conviction, appointing loyal companions from the military training school he went through, to appointing them to the heart of his command structure. Moses sets about building a new Egyptian army. The old guard had disgraced themselves, retreating from the Kushites at every step. Now we've got a new leader at the helm, and the tide of war is about to turn. So let me pause here. Any reactions, any observations or questions about what's happening here at this point in Moses' life between Egypt and Kush? All good? So what happens under Moses, according to Josephus? So Moses, under the persuasion of the king and others, he cheerfully undertakes the task. He comes upon the Ethiopians before they even expect him, joins battle with them, defeats them, deprives them of their hopes they had of success against the Egyptians, goes on overthrowing their cities, and makes a great slaughter of these Ethiopian Kushites. First, he retakes Memphis. Then he goes down and retakes holy Thebes. Then the Kushite forces are finally turned back at Aswan down here. And they flee in their ships back to their homeland. But Moses, Prince Moses, not satisfied at the recovery of Egypt to its traditional border. Their flag, they've got, just like how, you know, there's a snake on Pharaoh's head in his wardrobe. Well, it's also a standard they carry on their flags. It's called the Uraeus. It's the image of the cobra goddess Wajet, and it's attached to the forehead of the royal crown and headdresses. According to the mythology, its function is to protect the king by spitting flames at those who might try to harm the pharaoh. Yeah. And so they carry a serpent standard with them before the army. That's the symbol of Egypt's supernatural power. So with all this, Moses pursues the enemy further upstream. Before these Kushites can regroup, the Egyptian forces surround their capital down at Kerma, right? All the way down here. So the place is besieged with a great difficulty. It is both encompassed by the Nile all around and other rivers, and it's encompassed with a strong wall with great ramparts between the wall and the rivers. So this is a tough one. So while they're sitting outside there, trying to figure out what they're going to do, and of course, Moses not happy, sitting and twiddling his thumbs. What happens? Well, Tharbis, she is the daughter of the king of the Ethiopians. She happens to see Moses as he leads the army near the walls, and he's fighting with great courage as they're trying to make their way. Apparently, he's beautiful. Eyes of God and his folks. So the story goes, according to Josephus, she fell deeply in love with him. Sent him, most faithful of her servants, to talk with him about marriage. He accepts the offer on condition that she will give up their city, surrender the city for her hand in marriage. The siege had lasted several weeks. The Kushite ruler refused to commit his one-down forces to the battle in the open plain against the Egyptians. So finally, a delegation is sent over to the Egyptian camp, offering Cush's surrender and the hand of the king's daughter in marriage to Prince Moses, if he would spare the lives of the rest of the royal family. Story goes, Moses accepts the offer. He marries Prince Tharbis, before he returns to Egypt. Their fleet now heavy in the water with all the recovered treasures of Egypt, bringing them back. The Jewish Talmud commentary on the books of the Bible contains the legend of Moses' marriage to the Ethiopian Kushite princess also. Josephus tells us, no sooner was the agreement made than it took effect immediately, and when Prince Moses had suppressed the Ethiopians, gave thanks to God, consummated his marriage, and led the Egyptians back to their own land. So, the Egyptian fortress there at that second cataract, reoccupied by the Egyptians, small military force remains down here at Kerma to protect the new Egyptian ambassador who's left behind, established by Moses. So there's an impressive mud brick platform the ambassador's residence once stood. We can still see it today. It is called the Western Defafa. And there it is. We can actually go here for a better look. Defafa. Deffufa.
Are those natural
No,
rocks behind it?
no, that's actually part of it.
Oh,
That's part of it. Yeah, that's the understructure. When the outer frame is no longer there. So there's that. There's an overshot of it. Kind of get the sense of it. So
be tired just to look at it.
yeah, whoops, that's not what I wanted.
Built all those walls and everything.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it just makes me tired.
See if we can do this. Google Earth has these things called photospheres where people take 360 picture images with their modern technology. So here we are on top of it, looking down.
And those are walls.
Those are walls. Yeah, we're on the roof right now. We're on the roof looking down. Yeah, along with the tourists. Yeah, so there's what we were seeing at the front there. Yeah. Look kind of spiffy that we can do that. There was a large stela, which is a big thing of rock or stone that gets engraved. It's now in the British Museum, a fragment of it. This large stela was set up to record this great victory that was fought on behalf of Pharaoh Sobekhotep IV. A life-size statue of the king was erected at a place called Argo. Let's see. Argo, did I have Argo on here? Let's see. We want, no, that's good. We'll good there. We can actually zoom back out of the photosphere. Let's go back facing north. So, what's that for now? Argo. Further up here. God bless you. So up in this area here. So In the middle, this life-size statue of Sobekhotep IV is erected in the middle of the Nile, just upstream from Kerma. So putting these statues here, that was their traditional way of establishing a new boundary for Pharaoh. Yeah, the Egyptian forces were expected to protect the image of the royal master as if it was the king himself. Funny thing, the only reference we have to a military campaign by the Egyptians into this area of Upper Nubia during this time frame is on a stela fragment that's in the British Museum, and the king whose name tag is in there is Sobekhotep IV, this very guy. So that's kind of interesting, kind of some further confirmation of what we're looking at and talking about here. Zoom back up. You and you. There we are. And back down to you. Let's turn it off right here. So also, there's another stela of Sobekhotep IV that's in a wadi, the Wadi Hammamet, where there's a list of the king's son. And the first one listed is under the pet name Mo, likely a short form of Sobek Mos or Happy Mos, born of the Nile, Moses, who was brought out of the water of the Nile, listed as son of the king there. So what do we know from all of this? We know there is a powerful dynasty of Kush that was at the same time frame in the second intermediate period, that it was right here along this branch or this area of the Nile, this bend of the Nile. It's called the Dongola Bend. And this is the capital Kermit is 155 miles south of the old border at Semna. This has been excavated by universities of Harvard and Boston, 1913 to 16. Like I said, they found those royal tumuli, the funeral mounds with all their burials of their servants, and they found this western Dafafa. That word is Arabic, meaning walled village or fort. Yeah, from the ancient Nubian word Adifi. So those solid mound of bricks rise over 65 feet high. They once supported a building that's now completely disappeared through the erosion or quarrying. So they got to that stronghold with a really broad staircase rising through that platform to the summit. And there's a complex of buildings that had a bunch of Egyptian artifacts down here in Kush in Ethiopia, and a sanctuary or a shrine. So the character of the brickwork here is absolutely Egyptian brickwork, not Kush or Ethiopian brickwork. The whole design of this Dafafa, it's definitely designed and constructed with Egyptian supervision. So it's beyond dispute. There were Egyptians here at Kerma, but which Egyptians built the embassy or governor's residence? They don't know the date of the structure offhand. We know it's during the second intermediate period, but it does seem to fit the story of Moses here, the work of his military following the Egyptian capture of the city here. The French uncovered nearby a brick foundation, circular building that was possibly that looks like African design. So that hut, we still see those today, the style. So that could have been the Prince of Kush next to the Egyptian ambassador's place, the Dafafa, for them to be meeting and having their conversations. No one understands why that Egyptian royal statue of Sobekhotep IV is there so far south. Some thought, well, maybe they stole it and took it as plunder. But why would they do that? And famous Egyptologist Alan Gardner says, it's difficult to know what to make of this headless statue of him that we found on the island of Argo, just south of Kerma. So, and since the inscription mentions there were hostilities here, did really someone from the 13th dynasty send their soldiers down here this far south? Well, when we read the story of Moses, yes, we see exactly. It fits perfectly and solves the mystery that they have when they're not looking at Moses. So he had the statue erected to honor his stepfather, and it's been done by earlier pharaohs before. So This is 124. This is now the result of this war with Kush, short-lived, that Moses won. This extended the boundary of Egypt further south from where it was by 124 total miles. Yeah, so this was a big win for them. This happens a lot with Israel too. They get attacked, invaded, and they end up defending themselves and ending up with more territory than they started with. So not wise to attack Israel. But here's the thing, the end of all this. So hooray Moses, right? Moses returns to Egypt. Think about David and Saul now. Moses' popularity amongst the ordinary Egyptians soars to new heights, of course. Every town, victorious army commander and his new wife pass on their return journey. Every one of those cities, the prince is lauded for his great victory, celebrated. But in the palace home, not so much. Moses is being celebrated by the people, kind of seen as a threat to the throne. Remember, Moses is Hebrew, and they've been trying to deal with all these Hebrews while they're trying to restore and revive their native Egyptian pureblood stuff. And also, too, Moses' stepdad, Sobekhotep IV, he was kind of absent when all this was going on, out of sight, out of mind. While Moses was the one doing all the fighting, Pharaoh was staying safe in the background. So Moses defeats the folks of Kush, and the victory is recorded in the name of his stepfather, Sobekhotep IV. But we can understand the king's a little suspicious of the might and power and popularity of Moses here. So was Moses, starting to build himself up and get a legion of followers and possibly want to take over as Pharaoh? So they're kind of watching him and seeing what they can do about this. So their eyes are on Moses. Yeah, it's leading from behind, right? So any reactions, thoughts, or questions on this tale of Moses?
Well, you kind of rounded up for me, because I'm thinking, because the Bible story that I always talk to the kids,
Yeah,
it was like he killed the guy and then he was afraid for his life, so he left. But if he did all of that and brought more land to Egypt,
yeah.
why did he do that? He just rounded up.
There we go. Good. I'm glad that helps kind of piece it all together. Yeah. Now I mentioned there is a scripture in the Bible that gives a slight reference to all of this. It's easy to miss. After the Exodus, when they are in the wilderness journey, talk about feeling jealous and threatened. Moses' siblings, Aaron and Miriam, they start fussing about Moses, and they even fuss about his Kushite wife. Now, some think that that must be somehow in the ancestry of his wife. That's the daughter of Jethro, while they're in Midian, which happens later. But them referring to him having a Kushite wife makes a lot more sense now with this story, with him getting a Kushite wife. So there's that. Yeah. Fire away.
All these events were speaking of the war with Kush occurred before Moses went to Midian, right?
Yep.
The other thing is, you mentioned a statue which was pretty far from where it would be expected to be.
Yeah.
The head was missing. So was it the inscription? How did they, if the head was missing, how do they know who it was from the inscription?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pharaohs have these oblong things called cartouches, and they have their hieroglyphic names inside there. It's kind of like a nameplate or a name tag. Yeah. And so this brings us to the end of the reign of Moses' stepdad, Sobekhotep IV. In 1508, we have another pharaoh whose name we don't have. His name is lost. He rules from about 1508, 1506 BC. Yeah, that's about it. It's also about this time, 1508 BC, that we have, let's see here. Yes, we have about this time, ballparking, we have the birth of Nun to his dad, Elishama. Looks like they're averaging about 20 years old as they are fathering the next generations here. Going back up, this is under the line of Ephraim, son of Joseph, and his Egyptian bride. So half Egyptian here, then on down there. You have from Jacob to Joseph to Ephraim on down. So Nun is the father of, nope, Joshua, yes. Yep, Joshua, son of Nun. So Joshua's dad is born probably around this time. Then 1506 BC, we have another pharaoh that we don't know who he is, what his name is, who reigned for about 2 years, 1506 to 1504. So with all this being said, the Israelites have now been enslaved by 1505 BC. They've been slaves for 40 years. 1504, we get another pharaoh. This time we've got his name, Sobekhotep V. The slavery is increasing. Sobekhotep IV had died, had a couple kings after him. Now Sobekhotep V reigns all of 5 years. It's not a lifetime career with a pension plan to be pharaoh. So 1501 BC, the Israelites have now been in Egypt for 160 years. And it was mostly good until lately. 1500 BC, we have a new pharaoh, Iayib, who reigns for 11 years. And we will actually stop there at 1500 BC. That's a good stopping point. And pick up next week as Moses continues to mature into his adulthood and what happens when he decides to pay his kinfolk a visit. So we'll get to that in Exodus chapter 2, but any other reactions or thoughts or questions? Anyone lost or confused or overwhelmed? Want to make sure everyone's cool and taken care of and up to speed and feeling comfortable with what we're looking at? All good? All right, we'll stop here. Go ahead and stop our screen share and stop recording. Let's get ready to go before the Lord in song.